We put ourselves in a toxic mindset where we think, I hate my job so much right now that I'll take anything. But you cannot settle because it gets you out of your current mess and then you're putting yourself into another one.
I've had performance reviews. It goes incredibly. They're so happy. Everything's great. Not a single mention of pay rise is brought up. How do you actually prep for that conversation?
There's so many other employees. Why are you worthy of this particular pay rise? You've got to believe in it. You've got to know and set your value. And if you think that you are worth more, then you must ask for it. They're not just assessing you. You are equally assessing them. When you're the only female sat at the table, it does feel overwhelming. You're not considered perhaps sometimes as important or that you've got anything valuable to add. Sometimes they're blind to the fact that they're not considering you as important. How do you overcome that when they don't realise they're doing it themselves?
Interviews, looking for new roles. Yeah. How do you kind of approach this?
I'm going to give you a really great tip that I practice everywhere I go.
Can you just be like a little like speaker in my ear next performance review? Hey Balancers, welcome back to another episode of the Balance Theory podcast. I'm your host Erika, and today we're going to have another conversation about how you can find and own balance in your own life in the topic area of work, which is an area that impacts every single one of our lives, whether you're an entrepreneur, whether you're a careerist, whatever you're doing. There's going to be topics and tips in today's conversation that can help you, whether you are looking for a new role and you're curious about interviewing, whether you have struggled having tough or sometimes awkward conversations about like pay rises and promotions, whether you're struggling with prejudices in your office or workplace. Today, I have invited a very good friend of mine, Sureena, on the podcast. And the reason I wanted to have her on is because most of our dinners the last couple months, or basically since I met you, has just been us bouncing ideas off each other and basically having these conversations. And I literally thought there's going to be so many people that have the same questions I've had for you or that you've had for me. And I thought it would be really useful for us to just sit here and chat. I'm really inspired by your career and the way you've pushed yourself. And I think the advice you've given me has really cemented quite a few things for me. So I just wanted to have you on to have that chat. And for everyone listening, you're going to feel like you are just sitting in with your friends, asking them questions to help you, figure out stuff with work. So Sureena, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. I'm honoured. And actually, you've never shared with me that the advice I've given to you has been cementing your journey. So that's nice to hear.
Well, I keep inviting you out for dinner, so that should be self-explanatory.
But that's two ways. Like, you've also given me really sound advice, and I think we work well. Like, you bounce off my energy and I bounce off yours, and it's just been, I feel like we were meant to be. Yeah,
it feels like a soul-aligned friendship. Yes. Actually, I'm going to share the story of how we met. So I think it was like 2 weeks into my first job here in Dubai, and I went to like an industry regulator event, and Sureena was actually sitting on the panel discussing like the convergence of crypto and law virtual assets. It's a booming space here. Sereena's also a lawyer, by the way. And I don't know if anyone's had this experience when you're at like an industry event and you see someone or you feel someone's energy and you're like, I vibe them, or like I just feel drawn or gravitated to them. And that's how I felt with you. I mean, I've shared this story with you. You were on stage. The talk ended. I walked out and I was like, you know what, I'm just going to go introduce myself to her. Like I'm not really a massive networker. Well, I wasn't at the time, especially not in the legal regulatory space. But I was like, stuff it. I'm going to walk in and introduce myself to her. And I think we didn't stop talking for like 2 hours after that. I met your partner on the day as well. And, we've just been mates ever since. So for anyone listening, when you're out and about at these things, if you feel drawn to someone, just go up to them, because you never know why you're being pulled in their direction or like what's gravitating you towards them. But that's my little like tip of the day. Like, if you feel drawn to someone, go up to them.
And I'm so glad that you did, because see your faces, it's quite overwhelming, as you can imagine. And I had seen you in the crowd, but I wasn't expecting you to come over and speak to me at all. There was a queue. Do you remember there were a couple of people waiting? And I think you were the one I was most excited to meet, because I had the same energy. Like, I got a good vibe from you, a good feeling. I'm so glad you did. And I think we even missed the next speech because we were so engrossed in conversation.
I don't think I even stayed with my boss that day. I think I just stayed with you and we just ended up chatting the whole time.
And then we worked out that we were like living near each other and we had the same interests. Yeah, I'm so glad you did. So thank you for that.
No worries. So that's how we met, guys. And we've just been bouncing off each other ever since. I think we're very aligned in terms of not only our careers, but what we want in terms of our life. Yeah. And so just to start, let's start at the I think this is a running theme in a lot of the conversations we have, which is selling yourself in a professional way. And I think a lot of people struggle with that confidence of how to put themselves forward because maybe they don't have the confidence or they feel like they're being really egotistical. And I think this is important, especially when it comes to, let's say, an interview, right? You're going forward for a new opportunity. That's most likely, if you're going for something different, it's most likely a step up or something outside of your comfort zone. Otherwise, why would you be moving?
Absolutely, yeah.
So this is something both you and I have done over the last few years. Interviews, looking for new roles. How do you kind of approach this?
Do you know what? As I've gotten older, I've seen it from a different perspective. I think when I was younger, it was always this nerve-wracking. It still is nerve-wracking, but then it was very much, they are assessing me. I need this more than they do. And
like they're doing you a favour.
Right, exactly. And I had an interesting conversation with an interviewer once who told me, and this is what changed it for me, this is kind of the turning moment that really made me see it from a different point of view, was that actually I want you to be just as comfortable as we are, so you're assessing us, because ultimately we want you to stay here long term. We don't want you to be here for just a minute and, leave in a year. And that's when I really sat back and I thought, wow, like so interesting. And I think we forget that. It's so easy for us to forget because there's so many demands in our life, right? We've got financial goals, we've got personal goals, we've got professional goals. All of these different things make us feel like if it's not this, my life is over. And like it's,
I need so much on these opportunities.
Everything. And I do believe that if a door closes, another one opens. And so if it doesn't work out, it honestly wasn't meant to be. And that's okay.
Yeah.
And I think it's having that acceptance in believing that, okay, this role is for me. I'm the right fit for this. And it's all about that mindset and understanding that actually they're not just assessing you, you are equally assessing them. And it should be seen that way, because what is the point, Erika, in taking on a role where you actually aren't really aligned with their values or their ethics and the way that they work? They might say to you, Sureena, well, we need you to work past regular hours. You might be on calls with, the US, for example. They're behind in time. That means you're going to be on calls at 8, 9, 10 p.m. sometimes. If that's not something you can do or commit to, it's not the right role for you. That this is outside of you talk a lot about balance, right? This is not going to
work
for my balance.
Yeah.
And so I think you have to understand and accept that, do you know what, maybe this one isn't for me. The money's right, the people look right, but actually the work itself isn't what I'm looking for. And I think it's taking that control back.
Yeah.
Because often we feel like we're out of control in those situations. And sometimes we are, because you've got recruiters involved or you've got 2 or 3 different parties involved. It's not just HR on their side, but it's taking that control back and saying, do you know what, if I don't get this one, that's okay. There will be something else. And it's easy to say, but hard to practice, but entirely possible, I think.
Absolutely. I think there's 2 parts to this. I love that you started off with the mindset tip, because I've been there so many times where you go into an interview and you're like, am I the right person for this, for them, right? Like I'm just one of many they're interviewing. But you could equally say, well, they're one of many companies that I'm interviewing and I'm actually assessing if this is right for me and being a little bit more confident in what you want. And I think that comes with actually knowing what it is you want. So I talk about a lot on the show. I'll link for anybody listening. I did a talk on stage at Dubai Active where I basically broke down how to find your unique balance. And that practice for me really helped me get clear on, well, what are my priorities? What are my non-negotiables? So what is the life I want? And therefore what job fits into that? I think we so often think that we have to shift our lives dramatically to fit a job. And you know what? Sometimes for the right opportunity, if it's aligned, if it fits with where you want to go, for sure, there's going to have to be some shifts. But in terms of applying for a role, you do not have to settle. And that feeling of needing to settle because you're like, oh, I don't know when another job's going to come up. Yeah. Especially if you're looking while you're already employed, comes from that mindset shift of like, I don't need this. I'm assessing to see if it's right for me. I want to share 2-3 things that I always ask in interviews because I feel like you miss the opportunity if you don't ask them questions in interviews too, right? That's one part of this mindset shift is saying have questions prepared that you want to ask them. Sometimes they answer them already. So some of mine are, is there working from home flexibility? So I would always want to work for somewhere that has some sort of working split. I don't want to be in an office 5 days a week. I don't care how good the money is. It's not personally going to work for me. The second one is workload and working hours. So if it's a place where they're currently really busy and their employees are stretched and they're bringing in people to resource, I want to know that.
Yeah.
I want to know what I'm walking into. I don't want to be told, we have a great work-life balance. What does that mean? You know, like, do people get off at 5? I don't mind working overtime. But, you know, for example, in law, it's quite easy to assess if you're going for top tier firms, Magic Circle, that is the expectation.
Yeah.
You know what you're walking into, right? So don't walk into that system thinking you're going to change it.
Yeah.
But if it's somewhere where you don't know, ask a question.
Yes.
You know, and you don't need to, I feel I used to be so fearful asking that question for like, to look like I was scared to work, like overtime and stuff. But I simply phrase it as, you know, I'm not, I'll be available for urgent things where required, but I just want to know what the expected working hours are.
Yeah.
You know, and they should tell you that up front.
Yeah.
Because it's not going to serve them if,
Absolutely
you know.
not.
Do you kind of have any questions that are like stock standard for you to ask?
Yeah, so I ask those that you've just raised, but I also often ask, I'm quite goal oriented, and I think one of the ones I always ask is how will I be assessed and how do you measure that success, right? Because in law it's so hard. We don't have KPIs like, you know, some other industries do. Our KPIs are very different, right? And so what do I need to do to move to the next level? And I know that sounds very preemptive in that, you know, I'm actually interviewing for this role and I'm already talking about the next step. But I think that shows the interviewer that you're considering long term, you're wanting to grow, you're wanting to, you know, have development, whether that's financial, whether that's a job title, whether that's learning something new, a training course, whatever that might be. I think that really, without directly saying it, tells them that actually, do you know what, they've got a long-term plan and their long-term plan could potentially be here. And I'm glad that you mentioned confidence, because I always say, like, the best thing anybody can wear, male or female, however you identify, is confidence. Because I think if you wear confidence, that's enough. And one of the things that I also aren't afraid of is sometimes telling recruiters or interviewers, and I know you align with this, that I'm actually interviewing for other roles. So when do you expect to let me know? Or when should I next expect to hear back from you? Because I think that also comes with the confidence of, well, you're not the only company that I'm interviewing with.
Serve up or I'm out.
Right.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I mean, you know, they're interviewing for other people for that role. So
I'm also interviewing.
Yeah, absolutely. Elsewhere. Just want to circle back. So what you said about like bringing up, you know, what do I need to do to progress here if I was to take this role? The reason that's also very, very important is because when it comes around to conversation about performance review, then you have tangible things to lean back on. As opposed to, oh, you've done a great job, and then we skim over it. But I digress. We'll get into promotion, pay rise in a minute. How about the question? I hate this question personally, but I've had to navigate how to answer it over the years. Tell me about your weaknesses. Any tips for answering that one?
Do you know what? I recently Googled this. It's so weird that you bring this up. I'm not joking. Like 2 or 3 weeks ago, I Googled this and I used to really struggle with it. And I think when I was younger, I gave really questionable answers. No, but questionable. Like I think they were perhaps too honest in that I'd say that, you know, I'm really organised outside of my life, but at work I struggle with like time management, which is a terrible thing to say.
Example of what not to say.
Absolutely. And so I, interestingly enough, Googled this recently, and there were some really interesting things that came back. One of the ones that I saw was that actually, and I think I align with this, is that I'm a little bit of a control freak, and I'm okay to say that openly. Like sometimes you just want things to be done correctly the first time. And when you're delegating, you know that you've got to put an added step into that process because you've then got to double check sometimes what's been produced, right? And so I struggle with delegation sometimes. And I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing. It just means I want things done correctly the first time. I get that that's also a very bold thing to ask for, sometimes from juniors. And I believe in growth and development, you know, always helping others, always, you know, supporting. But sometimes you don't have the time for it, especially in our industry, right? Like we've got tight deadlines. We need to turn things around quickly. So sometimes I struggle with delegation. But I think it's always important to put a positive spin on it. And you'd say, X experience happened, and now I've realised that it's actually better to delegate and add in or factor in the extra time that's needed for that review.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
So I think it's just, you've got to put a positive spin on any weakness that you're putting out there.
Yeah. I actually always say delegation.
Do you?
Yeah. That's funny
Really?
you said that. Yeah. I always say that because I'm like, it's like a positive and a negative, and definitely always back it with an example.
Yeah.
I think the more examples you can give, the better. Before we move on to like pay rises and promotions, in terms of like you doing a bit of DD on the company, or like in terms of just prepping for an interview, are there any stock standard things you do for anyone listening who's got some interviews in the pipeline or thinking of getting back on the scene? They could maybe just some like practical things they can start to think about.
Yeah, I think DD is so important because not only does it set you up for the interview, because and I'm glad you raised this, because I love companies that talk about, you know, gender pay gaps and how they do their flexible working. And, you know, some websites and some companies really advocate for it, and they post about it on their LinkedIn.
You can see their values.
Right. And some will never mention it. And I think it just speaks volumes about those companies. And you can probably set apart the ones that you're really keen on versus the ones that are maybe in your maybe pot. Do you know what I mean? And so DD is so important. And I think if you're going into an interview without having done any DD, you really don't know what you're getting yourself into. And I just think that's a really poor place to position yourself.
Yeah.
So it goes beyond just Googling the website. But then also I'm like, I'll stalk the people on LinkedIn, you know, because it's necessary. Absolutely not. And they can see that I've seen their profile. And I take pride in that because I took time out to learn about you. And there's been times in interviews where I've seen somebody do something on LinkedIn and I'll mention it. I'll say, well, actually, I did have a look at your LinkedIn profile and I saw that you did this. That's incredible. Like, you know, and it's nice to show that you've paid attention and understood also what that individual is doing within the business, as opposed to just the company itself.
Yeah.
And I think that adds a really personable touch when you are interviewing. And I think that also differentiates you from people who do just Google the website, right?
Yep.
Because you've gone the extra mile, right? Bare minimum. So yeah, it's really important. And in the UK, we have this specific website where people will give experiences and like reviews as to the company that they were. Yes. Yeah. I wasn't sure if I could mention it on here.
Yeah, why not? We've got it in Oz as well.
Okay, cool. And I swear by it, like absolutely love it because it's real, it's raw, it's unapologetic, right? It's people who and
disgruntled employees,
probably
all
disgruntled,
over the place.
yeah.
No, it's actually pretty good.
And it's so useful to see because there's like little boxes that talk about work-life balance and pay and you know, it kind of categorizes different things, and it's really useful to get people who work there currently or previously their feedback. And I think you do have to take it with a pinch of salt because there probably are some disgruntled employees on there, but most of the feedback on there seems to be very real, very genuine. So yeah,
it's just like another good checkpoint, I guess.
Yeah, absolutely. So I do go, I think, quite far and beyond. Sometimes YouTube, you know, sometimes they'll be doing something on YouTube, or they've been to an event or global event, and you know, they've got like an interview with the CEO, and CEO speaking about something that they're focusing on or their recent project. And I think all of that is so important. And I think I've never been that person that never does the DD, but that might be the lawyer in me talking.
Well, I think like, you know, you have to expect that you're not the only person that they're interviewing for the role. And at the end of the day, for me, it's always like, what's one simple thing I can do that stands out? You know, if the company is, or the interviewer is talking a lot about, you know, people's character and their personalities, I'll bring up the podcast because that distinguishes me from everyone else. I always say what you do in your spare time, that's your distinguishing factor with, let's say, all the other lawyers you work with, right? You're all there doing the same thing, but what makes you each different and why is that important? But if it's something different like that, you want to stand out and know something about them or ask an interesting question. I wish I remember the question I asked, but I remember asking something and they were like, oh, we've actually not thought about that. Like we haven't, you know, and that was like, oh, they're going to remember me now for that. But yeah, I think, you know, all good things for someone that's listening, things to think about that you could ask, things you can do to prep, and just mindset shifts you can have in terms of, you know, they're not the only company and you don't need to stress out about not getting this role, because if it's not right for you, it's not right. And do not settle, especially if you do not have to.
Do not settle.
Because it will not last, and it's your life at the end of the day.
And I think the other thing, I just want to add to this, because I know there's other talking points you want to cover, but I think also we put ourselves in a toxic mindset where we think, I hate my job so much right now, I'll take anything. And that's just, and it's so easy to fall into that, right? Because we've all been there. I've been there, you've been there. I know that personally. But you cannot settle because it gets you out of your current mess. and then you're putting yourself into another one.
That's great advice.
That is not the answer. Sometimes you've just got to grit your teeth, push through,
Be patient.
and wait for the right opportunity to come along.
Yeah.
It sounds so cliche, hearing myself say it out loud, but it's so true, because it is just going to be a toxic mess, and then the next one's going to be a mess, and then everything becomes short term, and then it's how do I justify such a short period on my CV, and then it becomes a different conversation. So yeah, I think it's not recommended. Do not settle. I agree with you entirely.
Yeah, and like just before we move on, like I think when you're in that space where you're like, I don't like my job, I will take anything. Like when you're in that headspace, we've all been there. You are so clouded and distracted from what you actually want that just by picking up and putting yourself in a different environment without considering whether that's aligned or right for you, you're going back to square one as though you just started the job that you were currently in. So you're not doing yourself any favors. You're better off just shifting your current approach to your current role in terms of what it's serving you and where it's brought you, and then take the time to really find an aligned opportunity. When you're not in a rush, it's the best time to look, because, you don't have to be in that desperate energy, even if you don't like your role. It could take months, it could take up to a year, but you just got to trust that like the right thing's coming.
Trust the process.
Absolutely. Let's talk about pay rises and promotions.
Yeah. My favorite thing to cover.
Yeah, because I mean, people think the conversation of balance is just about, how do you create balance in your life? But I really look at it in terms of every vertical of our life has an element of balance, and we can't ignore the role that salary has to play in our lives in terms of what we can do, how much disposable income we have, how that fares with our fulfillment in our job. And so navigating the conversation around pay rises is really important. One, we are never taught. One, we is laced with our own limiting beliefs around money and what we're worth. And then also this, I guess, power play between the organisation and an employee.
Yeah.
We're talking about like people who are building careers specifically. I've been in a lot of situations where I've had performance reviews, up to the yearly mark. It goes incredibly. They're so happy. Everything's great. Not a single mention of pay rise is brought up, right?
Yeah, I've been there. And you're waiting and you're waiting.
And it doesn't come up.
And then it's the end of the meeting.
So how would you go about bringing up the conversation of pay, and then we can negotiating after that?
So, you've got to be confident enough to raise it yourself. That's the truth. Ultimately, the employer may not want to discuss it. They may not even have it in mind. And I think it's also okay to say, on my next performance review, I'd like to discuss the potential of looking at my salary and increasing it. And I think when you say it, you make eye contact, you say it with confidence, and you maintain that eye contact because you believe it. You've got to believe
practice it in the mirror.
Absolutely. Yeah. Practice it in the mirror, say it to yourself. And, it is a really nerve-wracking thing to do because there's so many other employees. Why are you worthy of this particular pay rise? Like, what sets you apart from everybody else who's working just as hard as you are, perhaps if not more? You don't know what everybody's working on in terms of projects. You've got to believe in it. You've got to know and set your value. And if you think that you are worth more, then you must ask for it. That's the truth.
We have to distinguish between like, oh, I'm just due for a pay rise, like it's time, versus I actually deserve it, right?
Yeah.
So how do you prep for that conversation? Do you kind of look at the work you've done? How do you actually assess your value before you go in? Because that's really the key piece here to being confident in that conversation. If you just say it because you think, oh, I'm about time due for a pay rise, and it's a bit more difficult to assert yourself and then back it.
Yeah.
So how do you actually prep for that conversation?
Yeah, so I do this like a year ahead. I'm going to be honest.
This is why you're on the show today. Please tell me more.
I might join a role and I'm already thinking about like a year from now, where do I want to be? And I know that's it's a lot because when you start a new role, there's all these other things you've got to take into consideration, right? But for me, I'm thinking, right, what do I need to start writing down and taking note of to have this conversation come next year? So I'm going to give you a really great tip that I practice everywhere I go. One of the things I do is whenever there's a project or a piece of work, I'll complete that piece of work at some point, right? And I will then email my stakeholder and I'll say, sometimes I do it immediately after if it's a large organisation. If it's a smaller one, I'll wait till the end of the year. And I'll say, it's coming up to my performance review. I'd really like to get some of your feedback on how you felt our conversation went, how work was, the advice that I provided you with, the completion of the project? Was it on time, etc.? And if I know that it went well, I know that feedback's going to be positive, right? And so you take that feedback and you file it away and you put it to the side. And so you have hard evidence to take in your performance review.
Building your case. I love it.
Right, you build a case.
Proper lawyer.
Proper lawyer talk.
I love it.
And I do it with multiple stakeholders, different projects, and it will come around to performance review, and I've got evidence to put on the table and say, look.
So you just whip out like a stack of
Absolutely.
A filing cabinet, pass it to the HR lady and say,
yeah,
here
yeah,
you go.
Yeah, I mean, probably that conversation will probably happen with your boss before it happens with HR, right? And so, and it wouldn't be a stack. It's probably like 5 or 6.
Stack of feedback.
But I think it's so important to show them something, right? Physical, like this is real feedback. I've not coerced this. This has not been, taken under pressure. And you produce it and you say, look, this is what I've done this year. These are the projects I completed. And you do have a separate list of all the things that you did. And then you also have a separate list of all the extra things that you did outside of your role, or things that weren't expected of you, but you did anyway. Because often we do that in our legal industry, and I'm sure it happens elsewhere. And then you've got a list of all the things that you did, your goals, timelines of those things. And, you've got the core part of your role. Then you've got an additional list of the extra things that you did in addition to your role. And then on the third thing you've got is all your stakeholders saying how amazing you are and how great it was to work with you. How can they say no?
So then do you approach that conversation in terms of you give them a figure? Because this is like real practical stuff that I don't think a lot of people speak about. Like, how do you like to approach it? Do you like to give them that kind of evidence and talk through the performance, get their feedback, and then leave it with them?
Yeah.
Or do you like to ask for a number?
So we were talking about knowing your value, and sometimes you know what that number is and sometimes you don't. And also I think people are terrified of having a figure in mind, not only because they might undersell themselves, but also might be asking for too much. And I think that's okay. I think that's normal. So I often don't go in with a number because of those reasons. And I'm okay with that. I think I'm comfortable with it because my intention is to have them provide a number first. And then you
negotiate.
Yeah. And we were talking about knowing your value, and you said, how do you sort of, show them your value? That is that all those lists and the documentation that you've provided or feedback, that's you saying, look, this is my value here. People like to work with me. I meet my targets and timelines and deadlines. Let's discuss salary. And it can be it doesn't have to be confrontational. This is the other thing, right? It can be a really warm conversation. Like in my experience, it's always been, look, performance review, I'd really like to discuss salary. I would like to see an increase this year. Is there any way we can make this possible? Like, let's have a discussion. I'd like to have a transparent discussion. Are you open to that? And I think if you open it like that, no one's going to say, I can't say no one's going to say no, but it's probably more likely to be well received if you open it like that, rather than here's all the work I did, now give me $5,000 more. Yeah. Right?
Sure. So you preface the review that you want to touch on salary.
Yes. Yeah. And then you'll kind of gauge their feedback, and they'll say something like, I need to discuss with HR, etc. And I think that's your moment to sell, and you just say, look, I really love working here. Really enjoy working with the team. You're an amazing boss. But I really feel like it's justified for me to ask for an increase this year on the basis of what I've produced today. And I think it's okay to be...
You just word it so well.
You think so?
Can you just be like a little like speaker in my ear next performance review? No, but it's really good. Like the reason I love asking you these questions is because when you say it, I'm like, now I have it on record and I can come back and listen to this. Like everyone listening now has like just little one-liners that help them assert themselves or segue into what can often be a bit of an awkward thing to bring up if you're the one initiating it.
Yeah. And I think the language you use, you're right, is so important. It's because it also sets the tone of that conversation.
Absolutely.
And setting the tone right from the beginning is key. Because then you're not going to have a negotiation if you're saying, give me $5,000 or I leave. Yeah. Like, why would you do that?
Threatening, wow. Worst case.
Not recommended.
What not to do.
And perfect. Body language. It is so important to be comfortable, to make eye contact, to say it, to smile whilst you're having the conversation, not sarcastically. But yeah, just to be genuine. And I think if you believe that you are worthy of an increase in salary or a promotion, your body will reflect that, and the conversation will reflect that, right? Yeah. It's not forced. If you know you haven't put the work in this year, don't ask for the increase.
Yeah.
Because
Makes sense.
it's not going to happen, right? For so many reasons, but your body language is one of them.
Yeah.
You're going to show that it's not, you don't believe that you're worthy of one.
Yeah, absolutely. Before we move on, I just want to say like the actual practice of just keeping track of the things you've done, I think is really important for two things. One, I mean, obviously what you've already shared in terms of tracking and then getting stakeholder feedback, but you know, when it comes to like redoing your resume and you're like, what the hell have I even worked on? What are the matters? If you're actually keeping tabs of that as you go, like almost a practice of just building out your resume, even if you're not even thinking about leaving your job, right? Just in terms of upkeeping what you've worked on and building out that profile, it makes it so much easier for you to showcase like the things you've worked on. And resume is not only important for when you're going for a new role. Sometimes the organization uses your resume to pitch for certain things, right? So upkeeping that as a regular practice is great, not only for stakeholder feedback, but for resume. And number two, it helps you keep yourself accountable. If you've gone 6 months and had nothing to put on your resume, then maybe it's time to throw yourself into some projects because you know that if that conversation is coming around the corner and you want more money,
there's
you
no
need
justification for
exactly.
it. Yeah.
So I think that's a really, really good practical tip for anyone listening to just keep themselves accountable.
And I just want to talk about practical tips because people often say, oh, what am I meant to make a list? That's literally it. You go onto Microsoft OneNote or whatever you're using. And what I do is as I'm working on projects, I'll have a list and I call that my to-do list. On OneNote, that gives you a little option to tick the box once it's done. I tick the box and then that list I move into completed. It's literally, it doesn't have to be a convoluted, you know,
process
spreadsheet of Excel. No, it's like a basic checklist, and it's so easy to manage when you're doing the project. You can have that list as your to-do list, and it then becomes your completed list.
Absolutely. Or even just have your Word doc resume as a working file on your desktop and just add to it. Like however works, I guess, for anyone listening. But that practice is something I only really thought of in the last year, and I think would have been amazing to have just like regular tabs as I went, because I'm sure there's heaps of like really key projects and tasks I've done that I've just forgotten about, and it helps you refresh when it comes to like interviews, performance reviews, all of that. So definitely worth doing. I put out to the audience before our conversation today the types of things we're going to be talking about, and I asked them if there was anything specific that they wanted us to chat about, and I had quite a few people ask me about this, and it was how to deal with prejudices and biases in the workplace. And I think women come across this on the gender side more often than not. I have to personally say, and I feel grateful to say, I've not myself come across it. I know that you have come up with this in a difficult way in your workplace. And so for people listening who feel like they are blocked by such prejudices in their roles, in their progression, do you have kind of any words of advice for them? Because it can be quite a sticky, landlocked feeling.
It's
tough.
I imagine. Yeah, no, it's tough. And I think especially in our industry, right? Like it's sad that we're talking about this in 2024 because it's 2024, right? Like we shouldn't be, but it exists. It's real. And I think it's okay to say that it's happened, but also managing it is the most important thing. So for me, I've had both actually. I've had racial and I think gender sort of differences. I think in our industry, it's still quite male dominated. There are definitely more women now doing sort of partnership or leadership roles. But I've been in workplaces where I'm the only female sat at the table.
Because you're often in management positions as well.
Yeah. And so when you're the only female sat at the table, it does feel overwhelming. And so sometimes, and I'm sorry that I'm targeting this towards the male audience, but there is a lot of testosterone in that room. And, you know, you're not considered perhaps sometimes as important or that you've got anything valuable to add. And sometimes I don't know that they're doing it. Sometimes I think that it's just the norm and it's their practiced way, that sometimes they're blind to the fact that they're not considering you as important or
like it's more subconscious.
Right. And how do you overcome that when they don't realize they're doing it themselves, right? And so I think age is also another one. Sometimes, so I've been in a workplace where there's older gents basically sat around a table and then there's me. And, you know, I might look like I've got lesser experience or that, you know, she looks a little bit young to be at this, you know, to have earned her seat at this table. That's not necessarily the case, right? And I think experiences bring you to where you are today. And I think whatever experience you've had, and if you are in a position where you're in a senior position, or even if you're not in a senior position, right, you could be at any point in your career, and there's sort of an issue around sexual sort of differences, I think you as a female have to, and this goes back to confidence, be confident that you have earned your seat at that table. You are worthy of sitting at that table, irrespective of what anybody else believes or says. And I think you really have to believe it. And it's hard, because going in and trying to fight a conversation and, you know, trying to get your word in and trying to share your view, and then it's sometimes it's dismissed. It's hard to receive. And also you feel like, well, they can't see my value. And if they can't see your value, it's not that it's okay, but sometimes you have to accept that that is the way that this place operates. And if you're not comfortable there, then you have to move.
Yeah.
And it's like that Jim Rohn saying, right? Like, if you don't like where you're at, then move. You're not a tree, I think is what he says. Yeah. Like, that's true. If you're not comfortable in your surroundings and you know that you're not accepted as well as you wish you would be, then you have to change your surroundings. You can sit there and go home and, you know, cry to your partner about it every other day and not change your situation. But ultimately, if you're not being valued as a person there, then you need to change your environment. And
if we run with like the tree analogy, it's kind of like you are not going to grow in that environment because you're being caged in, boxed in. Whereas if you plant that elsewhere with a more fertile environment, then that's better off for you.
Yeah.
And this conversation is resonating really, really highly with a chat I had a couple of weeks ago with an incredible woman. Her name's Tracy Harmouche. I had her on the podcast.
Yeah.
For anyone that is really feeling this conversation, I highly recommend listening to our conversation. But she basically said something very, very similar. We put so much emphasis sometimes on in the workplace, right? There's this focus on, oh, we need a female on the team, or we need a female in leadership, right? Rather than who is the most eligible person for this role. And so when you flip that, it's not to say that these prejudices don't exist, right? No. I haven't experienced it, but I know for a fact that a lot of people around me have.
Yeah.
So I think we'd be ignorant to say that it doesn't exist. But there's a power in bringing it back to yourself and what you can actually control, which are your skills and your genuine eligibility for a role, which no one can take away from you.
Absolutely.
And other people can sit there and contest and focus on the gender side of things and not take you seriously for your gender. But if you are genuinely the most eligible person for the role and you're in the right environment that's going to support that, you're going to be in that role.
That's it.
And, you know, a big part of that is you believing it as well and backing yourself.
Accepting it.
Yeah, I think it's like that question of if you can't change, like don't try and change a system that's really rigid and like locked in.
Yeah.
Like just move if you're not, I mean, not that you should tolerate it anywhere, but sometimes people are very fixed in their ways.
Yeah.
And it's harder for you to fight that fight than to just focus on what's actually true to you, which is your skills.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. And I don't think it's just in the legal industry, right? Like I think cybersecurity, women in tech,
I think probably across the board, it's felt in probably any industry.
Yeah, and you've just got
women in business.
Yeah, definitely. And I definitely, I'm a girl's girl. Like I champion women. I am always that person that's going to hand down the ladder to have somebody else come up with me, right? Like I think it's important for us as women to champion each other and empower each other as well. When you know there's a divide in your workplace and you see that divide happening, sometimes it's necessary to step in and, like, you know, not necessarily step into a conversation, but sometimes you give that girl or that woman, you know, a little bit of advice on the side and say, don't worry about it. It's fine. Like,
yeah, if you see it happening, don't be ignorant to it.
Yeah, because sometimes a female needs that. Sometimes, is this me? Am I imagining this? Is it? Because we also question ourselves. I think we feel like, well, am I making this up, or is it just something that, you know, is actually real and happening? So sometimes it's nice to hear it from somebody that, you know, I did see that, but boss it, you got this. Yeah. You know, sometimes you need those words of encouragement.
Love it. Speaking of, any parting words of wisdom for our listeners, you know, maybe on the promotion side, pay rise side, selling yourself side, anything we've spoken about today, is there anything you want to leave on the table before we wrap up our chat today?
Yeah, it's really, I just want to just discuss mindset growth real quick, because I think all of this is about mindset growth and believing that the skills that you have are changeable. You can learn new skills, you can adapt. And it's important to accept feedback. You need to accept that there's going to be challenges in your journey. you've got to also embrace mistakes, because we all make them. I make them, you make them. Also just clapping for other people, because somebody else's success doesn't take away your own.
100%.
Right. And I think that's so important. And it keeps you positive. It keeps you driven. It keeps you enlightened. It keeps you kind of wanting more. And then the other thing I'd just say is be kind to yourself. Be so kind to yourself, because so often we have negative speak to ourselves, and then we hear other people talk badly about other people. You've got to be kind to yourself. And if you don't reach your goal in the next year, cool. Give yourself another 6 months. Give yourself another year. Life happens. And I think it's so important to just be kind to yourself, especially.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Well, they're all beautiful words. And I'm very grateful for your time today. I'm really glad that we took what's often, a chat over some dumplings and noodles to the studio and actually put together something for people to listen to. I'm sure it's a conversation I'm going to come back to time and time again if you're not available. But I think, you always give me such nice, comforting words. And so I know a lot of the listeners would have gotten a lot out of today's chat. So thanks for coming on, and hope you had fun on the show with me.
Thank you for having me. And I value our friendship, and I'm really grateful to be in here today. And hopefully there's something somebody can take back.
I'm sure more than one or two for sure. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Erika.